Hey folks! Recently I was shot a review code by those folks over at Game Critics since they wanted me to take a look at indie dev Sunny Syrup Studios' Spiritmancer, a curious stab at the action-adventure genre that incorporates some deck building elements. A novel concept to be sure, but did it make for a spirited adventure, or something I was quick to shuffle away from? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. Starting with the game's premise, which is introduced through a series of stylish animated cutscenes, which we're not going to sit through, so the sum of things is, you take the role of Sebastian and Mary, members of the Soul Keepers, an organization meant to safeguard the world from demonkind. A raison d'etre currently being put to the test given the imminent threat of a fresh portal being opened, which requires the immediate mobilization of their squad. Only Sebastian is an overconfident idiot who wastes absolutely no time in running off ahead and doing his best to show off, something which immediately translates to him screwing the pooch in record time, since not only is he directly responsible for the aforementioned portal to the demon world temporarily opening up through an act of pure and utterly avoidable incompetence, but he also gets himself and his team sucked into the other side, where, you know, they all get captured. Well, not him. He just loses his weapon, stripped of all his friggin' clothes, and then he proceeds to get bullied by a pack of basic mooks in a hilariously, hopelessly, absolutely pathetic bit of fisticuffs. In fact, the only reason he manages to salvage the situation and some facsimile of his dignity is the fact that he's offered a chance to fight back by the mysterious demon Zagan, who grants him access to the Spiritmancer, an ancient artifact that grants access to mystic weapons and the ability to enslave and summon demons. Don't question the ethics of the situation, it's better that way. Oh, and as for our deuteragonist Mary, well, she just taps into some latent half-demon shenanigans, which results in her gaining mystical powers which mirror the Spiritmancer's mythical potential, and some cat ears. It's fine. In any case, what ensues is basically a fairly haphazard attempt at tracking down and saving their friends, while doing their utmost to ensure that the portal isn't reopened. Partially buoyed by access to an indigenous population of adorable porcine minions. Also, something, the power of friendship, and not all demons are bad, just sort of a staple of how things progress. Look, I'll be upfront here, the narrative doesn't really take itself all that seriously. It is largely a very goofy set of misadventures, which feels more like a Saturday morning cartoon rather than an epic journey. Like, it can be funny, don't get me wrong, and some of the little bite-sized events happening as you pass through some of the stages are pretty damn amusing, but if you're looking for a well-written or built-up narrative, this ain't it. Especially as it gets near the tail end of the journey, where things start to feel especially rushed, with a number of revelations basically condensed into a conga line of expositional moments, culminating in an alright final boss moment because at least it was foreshadowed, and then an abrupt ending which does nothing to address a major plot point that served as the central thread for the second half of the game. But okay, while the story may not have hooked me, games like these tend to live or die by their mechanics, and the idea of a hack and slash with supplemental deck building elements definitely sounds neat. And since I was spending most of my time elbow deep in demon guts, it really helps to just get a feel for how combat plays out in Spiritmancer. So let's dive into the 5 core fundamentals of each character's kit. That being their primary weapon, their ranged attack, the demon capture ability, and of course summoning. Oh, and the dodge. Starting with the bread and butter, that's the primary weapons. That's right, plural, because while both the characters start off with a sword, they'll earn 4 others over the course of the game, each with a specific forte, which is a lot less exciting than you might think once you realize that they're largely side grades, and the fact that Sebastian Mary's kits, while aesthetically different, essentially mirror each other. Oh, and we can double up on the disappointment here because their movesets are also quite limited. We're talking a basic ground combo, a lackluster aerial option, and that's it. Still, all was not lost. There is, after all, a small skill tree to pursue, which you can spend gems on to do things like boost weapon damage, amplify weapon passives like damage resistance, crit, or move speed, and even provide extra abilities to flesh out their movesets. Well, movesets that are a lot less exciting once you realize how much overlap there is, given each melee weapon has extend basic attack chain, an upwards attack, and a dive attack. A disappointing turn of events, which somehow found itself further compounded, if only by dint of how lackluster they wound up being in execution, given that despite one looking like a launcher and the other a downward slam meant to complement aerial combos, neither really work on that front, leaving your aerial options desolate, and all but ensuring that enemies that float out of reach are still a hassle. What's more, while each weapon does have a charge attack that can be unlocked, the damage amounts to a fraction of a basic swing once the weapons are upgraded to any degree. Well, except two exceptions. One is the ranged primary weapon both characters get access to. Once it's fully upgraded, it can hit like a truck. That said, the second exception is a bit bizarre to say the least, given it eschews the whole character mirroring element. See, each of the characters get a heavy weapon as their final ornament, and it does do a fair bit more damage compared to its peers, making it less of a side grade and more of a raw upgrade. Here's the thing though, Mary gets an especially lame single hit charge attack, which can actually whiff if she's too close to the enemy. Sebastian, on the other hand, gets a unique spin attack that does continuous damage at a fairly rapid rate, mulching nearby enemies. In fact, with the right cards, it enables him to melt through endgame bosses, and the only downside is he gets dizzy if you hold it for too long, and there is literally nothing stopping you from just letting go and starting it up again a heartbeat later, so Mary is just sort of left in the dust kit-wise. It's very cool, very well balanced. But okay, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. What about the gunplay? And my answer to that is, it's alright, honestly. There's a decent range of weapons to be found, which are generally pretty useful, but all of which have limited ammo, forcing you to swap up your strategy occasionally. Or to lean on the basic pistol, because while it may lack much in the damage department, it can literally fire as fast as you can mash the button, allowing you to melt early enemies faster than your melee options. What's more, like the weapons, you do eventually unlock the ability to level these, specifically upping the damage of the ones you encounter, but I'll admit I wasn't overly inclined to do so given they were all equally expensive. Like sure, you do get the option to gradually unlock a roster that you can start a stage with, but investing in something that might be gone in 10 to 30 shots and then being wholly unsure of what you're going to find next, yeah, I ended up sticking with the basic pistol a lot. Oh, and as for the next part of the kit to dodge, it's largely self-explanatory, save that it's spammable with a forgiving iframe window, and the only real quirk is that a well-timed roll gives you a window to parry for a chunk of damage and stagger process, which I largely didn't do because of just how forgiving that whole iframe window is. And speaking of stagger, let's talk about that final core mechanic, card capturing, because, well, it's a bit fiddly. See, each enemy has a set of stagger bars, green for melee, blue for range damage, and purple for summon damage. It's only when you deplete these bars in order that an enemy becomes staggered, which lets you convert them into a card, and also replenish a chunk of health. And this is where the bulk of Spiritmancer's combat complexity really kicks in, because applying the right sort of damage to the right enemy while evading its friends can be a bit tricky at times. Nonetheless, if you want to play around with summoning cards, it feels necessary, because as much as this game might call itself a deck builder, you'll largely be playing with an improvised hand of summons, which are wholly temporary. Yeah, once you've used a card, it just expends itself, and for anything that you pull out of an enemy, it's just gone permanently. And absorbing an enemy while your deck is full, it'll overwrite the card that's in your use slot, so that's another consideration you need to make in case you were trying to hold on to something really good. But yeah, that's not to say you don't have a starting roster of cards you can shuffle through or summon, but again, they're expended when used, albeit with the caveat that they return when you die, or replenish it at a checkpoint. For money. Yeah, replenishing costs some of your hard-earned money, and the bigger your deck gets, the more it costs, which makes tweaking your deck suck, since if you spent even a single card, you'll have to pay to fully replenish it. Seriously, Adam Smith would be proud of these guys. In any case, this gradual attrition definitely nudges players towards engaging with the card capture system, and thus the whole staggering enemies things, especially given the overall size of the game's stages, since you'll be running out. There's just one teeny little problem. The entirety of the staggering thing. Because remember when I said it requires depleting those bars? That's really hard when you start killing enemies in a couple of hits. Yeah, you sort of get punished for leveling your skills too much, losing the means of easily experimenting with cards, or your best healing resource, which is sort of funny since there are hard caps for how much you can level based on your progress in the game. They just cap at a point where you're slaughtering things. Admittedly, endgame enemies get a bit tankier, so it is more likely that you'll stagger them, but even then, it's still a bit of a gamble due to crits. What's more, if you decide to go the opposite direction and, say, leave a weapon unleveled in an attempt to capture enemies more easily, well, you can't actually switch weapons freely. You'd think that, since it's a weapon made of energy, but no. You need to switch them around at a checkpoint, so if you wind up in a boss fight, you're locked in for an absolutely grueling headache. Now, it's not the boss patterns you necessarily need to worry about, because while they can be varied, and honestly somewhat fun to strategize around, I generally picked up on them fairly quickly, even when they switched phases. No, what made them a nightmare was their natural tankiness, especially early on, and the simple fact that quite a few of them will either move out of reach, which makes swinging at them very annoying, or spam invulnerability, while either attacking or just sitting there, like the first boss. The first friggin' boss, who I should note you fight before you have any means of empowering yourself, and she just blitzes at you while being unable to hit, which is just... yeah, sure is something. Little wonder then that the moment I discovered I could melt a boss with the basic blaster, I eschewed all other options in favor of some button mashing that would even give Revolver Ocelot pause. Oh, and hilarious side note here, which is to say insult to injury, there's a boss later on you'll encounter which summons demons you can snag mid-fight to help, which are largely unable to hurt the boss. Neat. But yeah, that is the combat by and large, which means it's time to talk about the other half of what you'll be doing, namely navigating the levels themselves, given that at its core, it's a stage-based platformer with a healthy dash of exploration. And I will fully admit, I do think this was one of the game's highlights. Each of the main stages provides a fairly expansive and distinct environment to navigate, complete with a roster of largely unique enemies to face off against and capture, a number of diverging pathways through each of the given segments, and a whole slew of hidden treasure chests to crack open for gems, materials, and bait. It makes navigating the area fairly fun, and even allows for a bit of replay value if you decide to just check the area again in order to engage with side objectives like capturing enemies only or only killing them, or in my case to pore over each level for the hidden keys stashed away, since they're used to unlock gateways leading to massive one-time treasure chests, which not only explode into bursts of gems and crafting materials, but more importantly, offer legendary bait. More on the latter two, I swear. There's just one small issue with the stages, and that's the simple fact that you'll be revisiting them a lot due to Spiritmancer's side quest system. See, in order to progress the main story, you need to essentially kill time by completing side missions. While some of them are short arena-based encounters, others are a bit more involved, such as scouring the entirety of a map looking for a treasure chest or a very specific enemy, or, worst of all, a set of hostages who are just scattered to every far corner of the map. And each of these, beyond the arenas, which are blissfully simple, take place in a segment of a stage you've already cleared, resulting in you revisiting older levels ad nauseum. Even the description for these missions felt like they were copy-pasted between each other more often than not. Quite frankly, even the two-phase boss fight lodged at the tail end of the experience didn't really redeem the journey of clearing out all those side missions. I wound up so burnt out by the end of it that I just stopped engaging with the combat and ran through stages as quickly as possible because I knew I'd be back there soon enough. Especially if I wanted to engage with the game's hub-oriented subsystems, because guess what? There's quite a few upgrades that are just tied to the side missions, which is further compounded by so many of the side missions unlocking other side missions. So if you want to access all your options, you need to engage with this network of grind. Which, yes, speaking of upgrades, it's finally time to pivot this review towards Spiritmancer's subsystems, such as the act of actually deck building, since the game provides you two central routes. Specifically, fishing and card crafting. Now, fishing is unlocked very early on and plays out fairly simple. Basically, you use some of your consumable bait, play a short fishing minigame, and pull out some cards from the water. Once you've done that, you gain permanent access to those cards and can slot them into your deck in order to tailor it to your liking. Admittedly, my initial introduction to the system was a bit lacking, mostly because it was broken. See, normally fishing is supposed to offer you 3 random cards, which are essentially tied to the segment of the game that you're in, that you're fishing in. That said, things sort of broke when I began fishing early on, and it only gave me 1 card at a time. Now, it did eventually fix itself when I progressed further on, but it was a bit odd and also unfortunate because I spent quite a few resources, including legendary bait, while being unaware that this was not working as intended. Which, yeah, is really painful because legendary bait is almost exclusively from those one-shot chests I was talking about, and they are the main way that you get a chance at snagging boss-themed summon cards and a few other goodies like that. I mean, you can still get them from mid-tier bait, it's just much rarer, like fishing 10 or 15 times in a row type rarer. In any case, it's a lot of RNG, and so surely there's a way to avoid that, right? And technically there is, since quite a bit later you'll gain access to the magic shop, which lets you research the recipe for enemy cards you fished up. You'd think it'd be any you use to at least reward the whole capturing enemy thing, but no. Oh, and before you ask, no, I didn't have a slew of recipes unlocked for all those blank cards that I fished up. That was all just wasted time and material. Not that I could even craft in the first place. That's right, folks. You thought we were going to talk about a functional system meant to improve your gameplay experience, but
it's a trap!
While the game certainly lets you waste gold and gems on unlocking these recipes, there's just a very small problem here. The materials it asks for, throughout the entirety of my playthrough, I never had enough of them. Whether I was S-ranking missions for the end-of-stage material drops, or scouring drops, or breaking the necessary items in a stage, just didn't matter for one distinct reason. Your materials continuously reset. While I'm not entirely sure of the cause, I was almost wondering if my inventory was just overwriting itself whenever I picked up some materials in a given stage, but who knows, really? The only thing I do know is that it utterly invalidates the farming subsystem, which is basically this time-wasting segment where you putz over to a screen that's out of the way, spread as many seeds as you can in the limited plots of land available to you, and wait for them to bloom between missions into materials. Something which in practice was utterly meaningless given the whole resetting thing, and I direly regret all the time I spent trying to farm up enough to engage with card crafting, and the gems and gold I spent. I had sunk quite a bit into researching card recipes before it finally dawned on me what was going on. I was initially just chalking it up to forgetfulness or bad luck until I reviewed my own game footage. At that point, my soul just sort of left me for a bit. Then again, it wasn't like I was short of resources, if only because of the whole porcine minion thing. That's right, that comment earlier on back in the narrative segment, that comment was relevant because of Spiritmancer's final subsystem, the Mercenary Guild, which is basically just you paying the Bacon Brigade to venture off to stages you've cleared in order to farm increasingly large amounts of gold and gems. Basically, it's a little management minigame, since you'll be hiring a melee mercenary for a fee of gold up front, which also doubles as the cost of sending them to a given location once they're in your employ. And given each location requires a certain amount of stats to clear, it basically becomes a fine balance of optimizing how the fees of your minions add up versus the gold you'll accrue from a successful expedition. In my case, I optimized it so I was always raking in surplus gold, which let me upgrade the adventuring post so I could hire more mercenaries, improve their quality, do more expeditions, and then basically do it all over again. And by extension, also slowly improve my roster of ham-fisted henchmen, which wasn't just their stats, but also their appearance. They'd look really rad when they're leveled up. But yeah, when I commented on the whole maxing out the skill tree for a given point of the game, this was the major reason why. See, while combat provides absolutely depressing amounts of gems, even if you kill everything in a stage, and the level rewards tend to be equally depressing for the effort, even if you S-rank them, expeditions rapidly scale up insofar as rewards, especially when you factor in the sheer value of later adventuring locations and the ability to run concurrent mercenary parties. We're talking thousands and thousands of gems that can just be crammed into the skill tree, which largely meant that the least grindy way to play the game was just to rush through stages as quickly as possible to minimize your time playing the game to get that sweet, sweet expedition payoff. Suffice to say, it did a lot to ensure that I was amply prepared to engage with the resource sink that is the general skill tree. And it's a weird one to boot, given it eschews the whole tactical choice element that you'd normally associate with one, like, say, the weapon tree, and instead leads you down a relatively linear path, which occasionally veers off into nooks devoted to one upgrade type. Here's the thing though, given that the game gates your progress in the tree, you're rather limited in where you can put your points, so you can't actually progress further down the line to fiddle with other side nodes until you advance that main path. It's a bit of an odd decision, especially because of how each side path is dedicated to a single upgrade type, and then made even weirder once you consider that there's a double jump in this game, but it's lodged near the absolute tail end of the tree. Like, I entirely get gating a mobility tool until later in the game, but given I couldn't even preview the majority of the tree, I never even knew it was there, and only really unlocked it because I had nothing better to do than shove my gems in the tree because of all the pig farming I was doing. Honestly, the whole way it's handled with the relatively forced direction of the upgrades and the tight control the game exerts over them makes it feel like a tacked on system, like an excuse to layer some more grind into the game, rather than a truly engaging system meant to empower choice insofar as how you upgrade your character. And seriously, there's already so many things to sink gems into, given there's the deck building tree, which is notably laid out a lot better, given it provides a path which boosts the maximum value of cards you can hold in your deck, and one which cranks how many summons you can have, again, as well as the weapon trees, which also provide alternate paths with varying focuses. Oh, and the card compendium, which boosts the various cards you can collect in nebulous ways. Also, funnily enough, unlike the magic shop formulas, you can upgrade cards you've captured but don't own. Though, as per this game's norms, the whole upgrading thing is a bit scuffed, given the gem cost needed to upgrade your cards will pull from different pools than the ones they state, which can make planning your build and resources around them annoying, to say the least, and exhausting. In fact, I'm tired of talking about this, so let's just swap over to something I found to be a highlight of Spiritmancer, namely the graphics, because regardless of my many grievances with the gameplay, I do have a fair degree of praise for its visuals. Whether it's the countless cutscenes that accompany story moments or the in-game animations, there is very clearly a lot of love here. For instance, while I might not have been wowed by the combat insofar as complexity, I can't fault the execution of its animations, and I did find it clever that it used the character and boss movesets in the cutscenes in a fairly fitting manner. Also, you can tell the developers were just having a bit of fun with the designs in general, if only because of the multitude of characters that can be encountered, including a number of background ones who just exist. And while we're addressing background elements, I really do like the effort that was put into making each of the game's stages feel distinct, both in regards to their overarching themes, as well as each of its subsections. While it doesn't fix the game's flaws, it still left me with something to look forward to. As for the audio, I definitely appreciated the sheer variety of tracks. It really helps to complement the various stages and situations, and I'll admit, I found a few to be pretty catchy or adequately dramatic. Here's the thing though, and it should be abundantly clear by this point, it's nowhere near enough to salvage this experience. In fact, I went into this game with high hopes since I'd been following it for a bit due to being intrigued by its premise, which made it absolutely heartbreaking to see the foundation for a functional or even fun experience absolutely choked by a janky set of scuffed subsystems, lackluster combat, overall repetitive gameplay, and a whole lot of grind. I could have forgiven that if the gameplay was good, but the simple fact is, it's not. Comparatively, as flawed as I found the story, it's still a step up. In fact, the largest consolation I had was that the very end of the game went by blessedly quick, in part because double jump and the movement upgrades meant I could zoom through the stages once I focused on ignoring all the combat, and a maxed out greatsword in tandem with all the damage and crit upgrades in the general tree meant I could hit like a runaway train, especially once I'd acquired the double damage and crit spell cards, to the point I just spun through the last boss and reduced them to mush in something like a minute and a half or so, including the mid-fight cutscene. Which is just a whole lot of words to say, I can't even call this game mediocre at this current juncture. There's such a vast gamut of things wrong with it that I cannot fathom calling it anything but a fail, at least until such a time as the majority of its bug issues are addressed. And even then, the core tedium would still remain, which is why I'm ending this review with an alternate recommendation, because if you want a good hack and slash game, I reviewed one. Go play Flynn, Son of Crimson. Check out the link to my review at the end of this video, or poke at its Steam page. You're welcome. Yes, bonus bit of story-related weirdness here for Spiritmancer. Here's something I've taken and granted in gaming. While normally games will have you click to see the entirety of a message, it'll just skip you off to the next screen here, which can lead to some cutscene weirdness and missing dialogue. What's more, there's nothing in the way of text speed options, which is sort of understandable for the cutscenes, but otherwise, it's just a bit of an odd choice. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment. If you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews and interviews, hit subscribe and the bell. For a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, check the description, and check out my Patreon to see reviews early and support the channel, like Green Witch Babby and Andy Noted. Also, I have a merch house with neat swag like Crit Hit coffee mugs and shirts. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.